Not all men are created equal. That was the harsh, undeniable truth Izuku Midoriya learned at the tender age of 4. It wasn't just a philosophical observation, it was a biological reality, etched into the very fabric of his DNA. In a world where 80% of the population possessed uncanny, superhuman abilities known as quirks, society had rapidly adapted to the extraordinary. People breathed fire, levitated objects, transformed into giant beasts, and manipulated the weather. Amidst this vibrant tapestry of human evolution, Izuku's manifestation was, to put it mildly, underwhelming in its spectacle. He still remembered the stark white walls of the pediatrician's office, the faint smell of antiseptic, and the glowing X-ray of his foot displayed on the light board. He was 4 years old, and he was changing. Well, Mrs. Midoriya, there's no need to worry. Izuku is definitely not quirkless, the bald, bespectacled doctor had said, pointing to the X-ray with a pen. As you can see, he lacks the extra joint in his pinky toe. He's already hitting the evolutionary markers. Inko Midoriya had sighed, a breath of profound relief escaping her lips. Beside her, little Izuku clutched an all-might action figure, his eyes wide with unadulterated hope. However, the doctor continued, leaning back in his leather chair and steepling his fingers. His quirk isn't an emitter type, like your telekinesis, nor is it a transformation type. It is a pure, textbook mutation. Have you noticed the pigmentation changes in his dermal layers? Inko blinked, looking down at her son. Over the past few weeks, Izuku's pale, rosy skin had begun to take on a distinct, grayish-blue hue. It wasn't sickly. If anything, the skin felt incredibly thick, almost leathery to the touch. I thought it was just a skin condition, Inko murmured. Not quite. Furthermore, his skeletal structure is undergoing massive densification, the doctor explained, pulling up a secondary chart. And the cartilaginous growths on his cranium, those 3 distinct ridges forming at the top of his head, are part of the mutation. Based on our preliminary tests, Izuku's quirk provides him with an exponentially augmented musculoskeletal system. In layman's terms, he is going to be incredibly strong, incredibly durable, and very, very heavy. Izuku had dropped his all-might figure. It clattered against the linoleum floor. He didn't breathe fire. He didn't shoot lasers. He just had tough, blue skin and strong arms. Can I? Izuku's tiny voice trembled, his large, emerald-green eyes welling with tears. Can I still be a hero? Like All Might? The doctor offered a sympathetic, albeit patronizing, smile. Well, kid, you'll certainly be able to lift heavy boxes. But pro heroes usually have something a bit more flashy. You might want to consider construction, or perhaps professional wrestling. That day, the dream didn't die, but it was heavily bruised. 10 years later, Aldera Junior High was a breeding ground for overinflated egos, none more swollen than that of Katsuki Bakugo. Hey, Deku! Are you even listening to me, you stone-headed extra? Izuku blinked, pulling himself out of his notebook. He looked up, way up. At 14 years old, Izuku Midoriya was a physical anomaly. His mutation had settled into a permanent, highly distinct form. His skin was a solid, matte slate blue. His jaw was square and broad, and atop his head sat 3 prominent, fleshy crests that resembled a gladiator's helmet. But the most jarring aspect of his appearance was his stature. He was short. Extremely short. Standing at a mere 4'11", he was the shortest boy in the class. Yet he weighed a staggering 160 pounds, not an ounce of it fat. Beneath his mandatory black school uniform, which had to be custom-tailored and reinforced with elastic fibers, his body was a densely packed coil of corded muscle. His forearms were thicker than most grown men's calves, and his hands, though possessing the standard 5 digits, were broad and calloused. I'm listening, Kaken, Izuku said, his voice mild, carefully keeping his posture non-threatening. He knew how easily his dense body could break the wooden desk if he leaned too hard. Bakugo slammed a palm down on Izuku's desk. Small explosions popped against the wood, leaving black scorch marks. The acrid scent of burnt caramel filled the classroom. The rest of the students had already filtered out for the afternoon, leaving the 2 of them, along with 2 of Bakugo's lackeys, alone in the room. You're applying to UA High? Bakugo sneered, snatching the burned notebook from Izuku's desk. The cover read, Hero Analysis for the Future, Volume 13. Are you out of your damn mind? They don't take D-listers with boring-ass quirks. What are you gonna do in the entrance exam? Flex at the robots? They got rid of the rule against mutant quirks a few years ago, Izuku stammered, holding his hands up defensively. And I have good grades. I just want to try. It's always been my dream. Your dream is a joke. Bakugo roared. He clamped his hands around the notebook and ignited a massive explosion. The pages blackened, the spine melting under the intense heat of Bakugo's nitroglycerin-like sweat. Izuku flinched, instinctively reaching out. Stop! He grabbed Bakugo's wrist to pull the notebook away. It was a mistake. Reacting purely on instinct, Bakugo twisted his arm and fired a point-blank explosion directly into Izuku's right shoulder. Boom! The force of the blast sent Izuku sliding back in his chair, his custom-reinforced uniform sleeves singeing away to reveal his slate-blue skin. The skin itself was blackened and blistered from the second-degree burn. Don't touch me, you freak! Bakugo spat, tossing the smoldering ruins of the notebook out the open classroom window. Listen to me, Deku. You're a glorified paperweight. You don't have a flashy quirk. You don't have range. You're just a short, heavy rock. If you want to be a hero so bad, take a swan dive off the roof and hope you're born with a real quirk in the next life. Bakugo turned, shoving his hands into his pockets, and walked out the door with his laughing cronies. Izuku sat in silence for a long moment, staring at the floor. The pain in his shoulder was immense, a searing, throbbing agony that radiated down his arm. But the pain wasn't what scared him. What scared him was the reaction. Deep within his chest, a secondary heart seemed to beat. It was his quirk's passive mechanic, a hidden biological trigger he had discovered by accident when he scraped his knee as a child. He called it guts. Whenever Izuku suffered a physical status affliction, a burn, a paralyzing shock, or a deep laceration, his adrenal glands went into absolute overdrive. His muscle fibers tightened, drawing in oxygen at a terrifying rate. Right now, beneath the blackened skin of his shoulder, his muscles were swelling. A faint, almost imperceptible red aura seemed to emanate from his body, radiating intense heat. His grip on the edge of his wooden desk tightened. With a sickening crunch, the solid oak snapped under his fingers like a dry twig. His physical strength, already formidable, was actively doubling in response to the pain. It was a survival mechanism, an evolutionary trump card designed to make him hit harder when he was wounded. Breathe, Izuku. Breathe, he told himself, closing his eyes. He focused on his heart rate, forcing himself to calm down. He willed the adrenaline back into the depths of his biology. Slowly, the throbbing red aura faded, and his muscles relaxed back to their normal, albeit dense, state. The burn remained stinging fiercely, but the terrifying surge of power subsided. He couldn't hit Bakugo. Even if he wanted to, a punch with his guts activated would likely shatter Bakugo's ribcage. A hero didn't kill his classmates. Sighing heavily, a sound that rumbled deep in his broad chest, Izuku stood up, gathered his backpack, and headed outside to retrieve his notebook from the koi pond. The walk home was a solitary affair. Izuku dragged his feet, his reinforced sneakers scuffing against the pavement. The afternoon sun beat down on his blue-gray skin, offering no comfort. He stared at the waterlogged, burned notebook in his large hands. A glorified paperweight. Was Bakugo right? Izuku's quirk, which he had categorized as a fighting-type mutation, was entirely melee-focused. He possessed no ranged attacks, no mobility enhancements to cover distances quickly, and no elemental resistances. If a villain with a gun or a long-range emitter quirk kept him at bay, he was useless. He walked under the shadow of a concrete overpass, the darkness offering a brief respite from the glaring sun. But all might saves people with his fists, Izuku reasoned, trying to cheer himself up. He just punches so hard he changes the weather. Maybe if I just train my muscles more. A strange, squelching sound broke his train of thought. Izuku stopped. He turned around, his three-head crest twitching as he sensed movement behind him. From the metal grate of the sewer drain, a horrific amalgamation of dark green, viscous slime was bubbling up. It smelled of rotting garbage and raw sewage. Two massive, bulbous eyes materialized within the sludge, followed by a jagged, mocking mouth. A medium-sized meat shield, the sludge villain gurgled, its voice wet and guttural. Perfect. You look dense enough to handle the strain. Don't worry, kid. It'll only hurt for about 45 seconds. Before Izuku could react, the villain lunged. A tidal wave of foul-smelling slime crashed over him. Izuku gasped, a fatal error. The sludge forced its way into his mouth, his nose, sliding down his throat like liquid sandpaper. It was suffocating, burning his lungs as it tried to hijack his central nervous system. Panic seized him. Izuku dropped his notebook and reached up, his thick, muscular fingers clawing at the slime. Stop fighting it. The villain hissed, the sludge swirling violently. You've got a tough hide, kid, I'll give you that. My sludge usually melts through skin, but yours is like tire rubber. Just give up and let me in. Izuku's vision blurred. He couldn't breathe. The pain in his chest was agonizing, triggering his adrenal glands. The burn on his shoulder from Bakugo flared, compounding with the suffocation. Guts activated. The red aura flared violently around Izuku's body. His muscles bulged, tearing the seams of his school uniform. His slate blue skin darkened. I have to get it off. Drawing his right arm back, Izuku focused every ounce of his doubled strength into the side of his hand. He visualized the martial arts videos he watched online, the precise angles of a striking edge. Karate chop! He swung his hand in a brutal, horizontal arc, aiming for the villain's eyes. The strike generated a massive shockwave, the sheer kinetic force parting the air with a loud crack. His hand cleaved through the sludge, splitting the villain's mass perfectly in half. For a split second, Izuku could breathe. But the relief was fleeting. Nice try, tough guy. The villain laughed, the two halves of the slime instantly reforming and crashing back over Izuku's face. But physical attacks don't work on fluid. Despair washed over Izuku. It was true. His quirk, his incredible strength, was completely useless against a liquid enemy. He couldn't punch water. He was going to die here, in a dark tunnel, just as Bakugo had predicted. His eyes rolled back. His grip weakened. Then, the manhole cover at the end of the tunnel blasted into the air like a flipped coin. Footsteps. Heavy, impossibly fast footsteps echoed through the concrete space. Have no fear, you are safe. A booming, melodic voice echoed, vibrating the very stones of the tunnel. Now that I am here, Izuku forced his eyes open a fraction of a millimeter. Through the murky green slime, he saw a towering silhouette. Broad shoulders, a massive V-tapered physique, and two distinct tufts of blonde hair standing up like rabbit ears. All might? The number one hero pulled his arm back, the muscles bunching with terrifying, godlike power. Texas. Smash! All Might threw a punch into the empty air. He didn't even make contact with the villain. The resulting wind pressure was a localized hurricane. The sheer force of the pneumatic shockwave tore the sludge villain atom from atom, splattering the viscous green slime against the tunnel walls. Izuku felt the pressure wash over him, but his dense, heavy body anchored him to the ground while the villain was blown away. He gasped, falling to his hands and knees, coughing up foul-tasting sludge. Are you all right, young man? All Might was suddenly kneeling beside him, his massive hand gently patting Izuku's broad blue back. Apologies for getting you caught up in my villain hunt. I usually don't make mistakes like this, but this city's sewer system is quite the maze. Izuku couldn't speak. He was starstruck. He was looking at his idol, the man he had worshipped since he could walk. All Might was even bigger in person, radiating an aura of absolute safety and invincibility. All Might produced a large, empty soda bottle from his pocket, and began swiftly scooping the scattered remains of the sludge villain into it, capping it tightly. Well, I must be off. A hero's work is never done. Take care, young citizen. All Might turned, crouching low to the ground. Wait! Izuku croaked, finding his voice. I have so many questions. Please, no time. Farewell. All Might sprang into the air, rocketing out of the tunnel like a surface-to-air missile. But he carried extra weight. High above the city skyline, the wind roaring in his ears, All Might looked down. Clinging to his muscular thigh was Izuku. The boy's slate blue, three-fingered hands were dug into the fabric of All Might's cargo pants, his grip unbreakable. For a Machamp mutant, holding on to a moving object with a grip strength of 3000 psi was child's play. Hey, hey, hey! All Might yelled, his eyes bugging out in shock. Let go! Your grip is incredible, but this is extremely dangerous. If I let go now, I'll die. Izuku screamed over the rushing wind, his head crest flattening against his skull. Good point. Close your eyes and mouth. A few moments later, they landed with a heavy thud on the roof of a 3-story commercial building. Izuku released his death grip, stumbling backward, his knees knocking together. Goodness, that was terrifying, Izuku panted, rubbing his chest. All Might stood tall, crossing his arms. Not a very smart move, young man. You could have been killed. Now, please wait here. I must get this villain to the police. Wait. Izuku lunged forward, reaching a thick hand out. This is my only chance. I have to know. Please, All Might. Just one question. Izuku begged, looking down at his blue, calloused hands. My whole life, people have told me my quirk is useless. That I'm just a walking brick. That I don't have what it takes because I can't shoot lasers or make explosions. Izuku looked up, tears brimming in his emerald eyes. Can someone with just a physical mutation, someone who can only punch and kick, ever become a hero like you? Can I save people with these hands? All Might stopped. He looked at the boy. He saw the unusual musculature, the gray-blue skin, the distinct cranium crests. It was a powerful body, yes, but the hero industry was brutal. Suddenly, steam began to billow from All Might's body. Izuku blinked, wiping a tear away. What? The smoke cleared. In place of the towering, muscular god of justice stood a skeletal, emaciated man in baggy clothes. His eyes were sunken pools of shadow, blood dribbling from his chin. Izuku shrieked, backing up until his heavy body hit the chain-link fence at the edge of the roof. Who are you? What happened to All Might? The skeletal man sighed, sitting heavily against the rooftop railing. I assure you, kid, I am All Might. He pulled up his oversized white shirt, revealing a horrific, purple, starburst-shaped scar covering the entire left side of his chest. 5 years ago, All Might rasped, his voice lacking its booming echo. An enemy did this to me. My respiratory system was nearly destroyed. My stomach was removed. I can only do hero work for about 3 hours a day now. Izuku stared in horror. The invincible hero was broken. You asked if you could be a hero with just your fists and your body. All Might continued, looking out over the city. Pro-heroes are always risking their lives. Some villains can't be beaten with just a punch. Some villains, like the one I just captured, are immune to physical force. If you don't have versatility, if you don't have range or a way to protect yourself from the truly bizarre quirks out there, you will die. The words hit Izuku like a physical blow. I cannot, in good conscience, tell you that a purely physical mutation is enough to reach the top, All Might said softly, not looking at Izuku. It's a noble dream. But you need to be realistic, kid. If you want to help people with your strength, become a police officer. Become a firefighter. They get ridiculed, but it's a fine profession. It's not bad to dream, but make sure your dreams are attainable. All Might stood up, wiping the blood from his chin. He walked past Izuku, opening the roof access door. I'll see myself out. Make sure you get downstairs safely. The door clicked shut. Izuku stood alone on the roof. The wind howled around him. He looked down at his thick, blue hands. He clenched them into fists, his knuckles popping. Even All Might had said it, be realistic. Izuku didn't remember walking down the stairs. He didn't remember walking the next few blocks. He felt numb. The burn on his shoulder still throbbed, a dull ache that mirrored the crushing weight in his chest. He was walking through a shopping district, his head hung low, when a massive explosion rocked the street. The ground shook beneath his reinforced sneakers. Smoke billowed into the sky a few blocks away. The sound of screaming civilians pierced the air. Izuku's body moved automatically. Before his brain could process his depression, his feet were carrying him toward the chaos. It was the instinct of a fanboy, the ingrained habit of observing hero fights. He pushed his way through a crowd of onlookers to the front of a police barricade. What he saw made his blood run cold. The street was a war zone. Fires raged across the storefronts. Pro-heroes, Kamui Woods, Empty Lady, Death Arms, and Backdraft were standing by, looking frustrated and helpless. And in the center of the inferno was the sludge villain. The bottle! Izuku realized with sickening clarity. When I grabbed All Might's leg, it must have fallen out. This is my fault. But that wasn't the worst part. The sludge villain had a hostage. It was wrapped around a teenager in a middle school uniform, trying to force its way down the boy's throat. The hostage was thrashing violently, unleashing massive, desperate explosions from his palms, which only set more of the street on fire. Ash blonde hair. Piercing red eyes filled with terror. It was Bakugo. Why aren't the heroes doing anything? A civilian next to Izuku shouted. The villain grabbed a kid with a strong quirk. Another answered. Death Arms can't get close, the kid's explosions are too erratic. And Kamui Woods will catch fire. Izuku stared at Bakugo. Their eyes met through the swirling smoke and green slime. For the first time in his life, Izuku didn't see an arrogant bully. He saw a boy who was suffocating. He saw someone pleading for help. The heroes were waiting for someone with a better quirk. They were waiting for a specialized emitter. Izuku didn't have an emitter quirk. He was just a heavy, blue, walking brick. But I'm here. Before conscious thought could stop him, Izuku vaulted over the police barricade. Hey! Kids, stop! Death Arms roared, reaching out, but Izuku was incredibly fast for his size. His dense leg muscles propelled him forward like a cannonball. Deku? Bakugo gurgled, his eyes widening in shock as the short, blue-skinned boy charged toward him. You again? The sludge villain roared, recognizing Izuku's crests. You want to die that badly? The villain swung a massive tendril of solid sludge like a whip. Izuku didn't dodge. He couldn't. The whip struck Izuku squarely in the chest. The force was enough to crack a car windshield. It tore through Izuku's already ruined shirt, lashing violently against his slate blue skin. It hurt. It hurt tremendously, and that was exactly what Izuku needed. The laceration across his chest, combined with the burn on his shoulder, pushed his biological trigger past the breaking point. Guts activated. A blinding, crimson aura erupted from Izuku's body. His eyes, usually a soft emerald green, dilated, glowing with feral intensity. His muscles swelled, expanding his mass so violently that the remnants of his shirt shredded into confetti. The veins in his thick neck and arms bulged, pulsing with supercharged adrenaline. His physical strength doubled. Then, as the pain receptors fired, it tripled. Izuku didn't stop running. He slammed his foot into the asphalt, digging his custom-reinforced toe into a crack in the street. I can't punch the slime. But he's using the street to anchor himself. Izuku dropped his center of gravity, throwing his massive weight into a sweeping kick aimed at the ground itself, not the villain. Low kick! His leg collided with the jagged asphalt. With a deafening crack, the guts-enhanced strike shattered the street. A massive, jagged chunk of concrete, weighing several hundred pounds, was launched upward with the force of a cannonball. The concrete slammed directly into the sludge villain's left eye. Ag! The villain shrieked, the slime instinctively recoiling in agony. The grip on Bakugo loosened just enough for the blonde boy to gasp for air. Kaken! Izuku roared, his voice deeper, vibrating with the red aura surrounding him. Izuku closed the distance. He didn't try to pull Bakugo out. He knew the slime would just regrip him. Instead, Izuku looked at the villain's eyes, the only solid, tangible part of its body. Izuku leaped into the air. Despite his 160-pound frame, the guts enhancement launched him 10 feet off the ground. He reached out with his broad, blue hands and grabbed both of the villain's eye stalks. His grip locked. 3,000 psi. Let go of me, you little freak! The villain screamed, thrashing wildly. Izuku didn't let go. He twisted his body midair, using his extreme density and weight to his advantage. He pulled the eye stalks downward, dragging the entire mass of the sludge villain up from the pavement. Seismic toss. With a primal roar, Izuku suplexed the villain. He threw his own body weight backward, slamming the villain's eyes, and the core housing them, brutally into the shattered asphalt. The kinetic shockwave of the impact blew the surrounding flames out in a 50-foot radius. The sludge villain's grip on Bakugo completely shattered. The slime splattered in all directions, losing its cohesive form as the central nervous system located in the eyes was stunned by the massive concussion. Bakugo tumbled onto the street, coughing up slime, gasping for air. Izuku stood over the quivering remains of the villain, chest heaving, the red aura of his guts slowly bleeding away as the immediate danger passed. His muscles ached terribly, the adrenaline crash imminent. Before the villain could reform, a shadow fell over the street. "I told you," a booming voice echoed, filled with immense shame and renewed fury. "To be realistic." Yet, I was the one who was blind to reality. All Might stood there, in his muscle form, blood leaking from his mouth, steam rolling off his shoulders. He grabbed Bakugo by the collar, tossing him safely behind him, and then grabbed Izuku's heavy, blue shoulder, pulling him back. Detroit. Smash! All Might unleashed a downward punch. The air pressure was so immense it changed the weather, forcing the storm clouds to gather and rain to pour down, putting out the remaining fires. The sludge villain was completely incapacitated, plastered into the crater Izuku had created. The street fell silent, save for the patter of rain. Izuku fell to his knees, his energy spent. The guts withdrawal hit him hard, making his blue skin pale slightly. The aftermath was exactly what one would expect from a society that favored the spectacular. Once the sludge villain was securely bottled up and handed over to the police, the pro-heroes descended upon the two boys. Bakugo was surrounded by Death Arms and Kamui Woods. They praised his powerful quirk, his resilience, and his potential. They marveled at how long he held out, ignoring the fact that he had been seconds away from death. Izuku, on the other hand, was being lectured by Kamui Woods and a police officer. "What were you thinking, kid?" Kamui Woods scolded, crossing his wooden arms. "You have a formidable physical mutation, sure, but charging in blindly without a plan? You could have been killed, or worse, gotten in our way. You're lucky All Might showed up," the police officer added. "Leave the hero work to the professionals, understand?" Izuku nodded silently, looking at his scuffed knees. "They're right. I just reacted. I didn't have a plan. I just threw a rock and tackled him." Across the street, Bakugo was glaring at him. The ash-blonde boy pushed his way past the praising heroes and marched up to Izuku. "Deku," Bakugo growled, his voice rough from the slime. Izuku looked up. "I didn't ask for your help," Bakugo spat, his fists trembling. "I didn't need a stone-headed extra like you to save me. Don't think this makes you better than me. You're still just a useless brick." Bakugo turned on his heel and stormed off into the evening light. Izuku sighed. That was Kaken, through and through. Gathering what remained of his shredded backpack, Izuku began the long, painful walk home. His chest stung where the slime had lashed him, and his shoulder still burned, but his heart felt somewhat lighter. He had moved. When the hero stood still, his body had moved on its own. He was passing under a railway bridge when a massive figure suddenly slid out from an alleyway, moving with impossible speed. "I am here!" All Might shouted, striking a dramatic pose. Izuku yelped, jumping back. "All Might? What are you doing here? Weren't you surrounded by reporters?" "Ha ha ha!" Shaking OFF reporters is a breeze for the number one, blurg. All Might violently coughed up a geyser of blood, deflating instantly into his skeletal form in a cloud of steam. He wiped his mouth with the back of his baggy sleeve, coughing weakly. "All Might!" Izuku cried, reaching out to support the man. "I'm fine, kid, I'm fine," All Might wheezed, leaning against the brick wall of the bridge. He looked at Izuku, his sunken blue eyes piercing through the gloom. "Young man, I came here to thank you, to correct myself, and to apologize," All Might said, his voice deadly serious. Izuku blinked. "Apologize? For what?" "If you hadn't been there, if you hadn't told me about your life on that roof, I would have been a worthless bystander," All Might confessed, looking at the ground. "I told you to be realistic, yet I allowed my own fear of my time limit to paralyze me. You, a boy with no specialized training, with a quirk society told you was boring. You were the only one who acted like a true hero today." Izuku's breath hitched. His three crests twitched. "I saw what you did," All Might continued, stepping closer. "That red aura. The sheer, terrifying increase in your physical density. You shattered solid asphalt with a single kick, and you had the tactical mind to use the environment when your fists couldn't hit the enemy. You didn't just throw a punch, young man. You weaponized the earth. Tears began to well in Izuku's eyes. They spilled over his thick, slate-blue cheeks. Top heroes have stories about them from their school days, All Might said softly. Most of their stories have one thing in common. Their bodies moved before they had a chance to think. Izuku fell to his knees, burying his face in his large, calloused hands, sobbing openly. The words he had wanted to hear his entire life, the validation he had sought from his mother, his teachers, his peers, he was finally hearing it from the greatest hero in the world. You can become a hero, All Might declared. Izuku cried harder, a deep, rumbling sound that shook his broad chest. All Might waited patiently for the boy's tears to subside. When Izuku finally wiped his eyes and looked up, All Might held out a hand. Your quirk, this mutation, All Might said, observing Izuku's physique. It is raw. It is unpolished. You possess a baseline strength that rivals seasoned pro heroes, but you lack the technique to harness it without destroying your surroundings. And that secondary ability, the red aura? It's something I call guts, Izuku sniffled, standing up. When I get hurt, burned, or paralyzed, my adrenaline spikes and my physical strength doubles. But it hurts, and it's hard to control. All Might's eyes widened slightly. A power that multiplies based on adversity. Fascinating. Young man, what is your name? Izuku Midoriya, sir. Well, young Midoriya, All Might smiled, a genuine, warm expression. I am going to make you an offer. I do not have a quirk to give you. I cannot change the nature of your mutation. But I can offer you my knowledge. Izuku stared, wide-eyed. I have spent my entire life perfecting the art of close-quarters combat. I know how to throw a punch that can change the weather. I know how to harness momentum, leverage, and sheer muscular power to overwhelm any opponent, regardless of their quirk, All Might said, his skeletal fists clenching. If you are willing to put in the work, if you are willing to bleed, sweat, and tear your muscles down to the very fiber, I will train you. Izuku's heart hammered against his ribs. I will teach you how to refine this incredible body of yours, All Might promised. I will help you push your mutation beyond its current limits. We will take your boring physical quirk and turn it into the greatest martial force this world has ever seen. Do you accept? Izuku didn't hesitate. He didn't need to think about the pain, the exhaustion, or the insurmountable odds of entering UA High. He looked at his thick, slate-blue hands. They were the hands of a Machamp. They weren't flashy. They couldn't shoot fire, but they could hit hard. Izuku looked up at All Might, his emerald eyes burning with unyielding determination. Yes, All Might. I accept. The smell of Takoba Municipal Beach was something that defied simple description. It was a pungent, eye-watering cocktail of rotting kelp, oxidized metal, decaying household waste, and the briny, stagnant scent of trapped seawater. For years, the ocean currents had treated this specific inlet as a dumping ground, a sentiment the local populace had wholeheartedly adopted. Refrigerators missing their doors, tires balding and cracked, shattered CRT televisions, and mountains of unidentifiable scrap metal formed a treacherous, jagged landscape. It was a graveyard of discarded things. Holy, whoa, Izuku muttered, his heavy, slate-blue hands resting on the rusted railing overlooking the shoreline. His three cranial crests twitched as a cold morning breeze swept off the ocean, carrying the stench directly into his face. Standing next to him, wearing an oversized white t-shirt and loose cargo pants, was a skeletal man coughing lightly into his fist. Toshinori Yagi, the true, hidden form of the #1 hero, All Might, looked out over the ocean of garbage with a discerning eye. Impressive, isn't it? Toshinori rasped, wiping a speck of blood from his chin. For generations, the ocean currents brought minor debris here. But people are creatures of convenience. Once they saw a little trash, they figured it was fine to dump their own. Over the years, this beautiful beach became an illegal, unregulated landfill. Izuku adjusted the straps of his heavy-duty backpack. Even at 6 a.m. on a Saturday, the 14-year-old was wide awake, his emerald eyes scanning the impossible mess. Why are we here, All Might? I thought we were going to a gym. Toshinori chuckled, a hollow sound that rattled in his chest. A gym? Young Midoriya, Gyms are designed for normal people. They have limits on their machines, safety protocols, and weight caps. You are a biological tank. If you hit a punching bag at a public gym with that guts ability of yours, you'd blow a hole through the drywall and kill someone in the parking lot. Izuku flushed, rubbing the back of his thick, corded neck. I guess that's true. Furthermore, Toshinori said, turning to face the boy, his sunken blue eyes suddenly burning with an intense, familiar fire. Heroism isn't just about fighting villains. It's about civil service. It's about restoring the community. Anyone can punch a bad guy, but a true hero cleans up the mess. Toshinori reached into his pocket and pulled out a crinkled, densely written stack of paper stapled together. He handed it to Izuku. Izuku took the packet. The cover read, "The aim to pass, American Dream Plan modified for mutant physiology. You have exactly 10 months before the UA entrance exam," Toshinori explained, his voice taking on a strict, authoritative tone. "Your physical mutation gives you incredible baseline power. You told me your grip strength is roughly 3000 psi, correct?" "Yes, sir," Izuku nodded, scanning the first page of the packet. It was a rigorous, minute-by-minute schedule detailing diet, sleep, and physical labor. "But you are lacking in 3 critical areas," Toshinori said, holding up 3 bony fingers. "First, leverage. You are 4'11". You have the mass of a boulder but the wingspan of a child. Second, technique. You fight like a brawler. You throw your weight around, hoping for a knockout. Third, stamina. Your guts ability is powerful, but it relies on your adrenal glands and pain receptors. If you use it too long, your heart will give out." Toshinori gestured broadly to the horizon of garbage. "This beach is your crucible, young Midoriya. Over the next 10 months, you are going to clean this entire coastline. With your bare hands." Izuku's jaw dropped. He looked at the literal mountains of trash. There were hundreds of thousands of pounds of debris. All of it? By myself? "With my guidance," Toshinori corrected. Suddenly, steam erupted from his frail body. The air pressure shifted violently, and a shadow loomed over Izuku. The skeletal man was gone, replaced by the towering, muscle-bound god of justice. "Yes. All of it." All Might boomed, flexing his massive biceps, a brilliant, gleaming smile on his face. "You want to be a hero with only your fists? Then your fists must become unstoppable. We start now." Months 1 to 3, the crucible of form. The first month was absolute agony. Izuku was no stranger to physical exertion. Carrying his own 160-pound frame around every day required a certain level of passive fitness. But this was different. This was grueling, ceaseless, asymmetrical labor. Clang! Izuku hoisted a rusted, waterlogged washing machine over his head. His slate-blue skin gleamed with sweat in the humid summer sun. His thick arms trembled under the awkward weight of the appliance. "Watch your stance, young Midoriya." All Might's voice boomed from atop a nearby pile of tires, where the hero sat in a folding chair, sipping from a water bottle. "Power does not come from the shoulders alone, it comes from the earth. Plant your feet, bend your knees, and drive the kinetic force upward through your hips." Izuku gritted his teeth, his 3 crests flattening against his skull. He adjusted his footing in the shifting sand. Sand was the worst enemy of leverage. Every time he pushed down, the earth gave way. He widened his stance, feeling the muscles in his thick, tree-trunk thighs lock into place. With a guttural roar, Izuku pressed the washing machine upward, walked it 20 yards up the beach, and tossed it into the back of the rented disposal truck. He collapsed onto the sand, gasping for air. Toshinori, having reverted to his skinny form to conserve time, hopped down and walked over. "You're relying too much on your upper body. Your core gives you dense musculature, but you are treating your body as separate parts. A punch is not an arm movement. A lift is not a back movement. It is a full-body chain." Toshinori dropped into a low horse stance, his bony knees bent, his back perfectly straight. Despite his frail appearance, there was a profound grace and deadly precision in his posture. "Stand up, Izuku. Let me teach you a technique. In martial arts, focusing your mass into a single point of impact maximizes the output." Izuku hauled himself up, brushing wet sand off his blue skin. He mimicked Toshinori's stance. Bring your right hand up. Keep the fingers flat, thumb tucked, Toshinori instructed, adjusting Izuku's arm. You used a strike against the sludge villain to cut through his liquid form. You instinctively used the edge of your hand. Let's refine that. Over the next several weeks, Izuku spent hours not just moving trash, but practicing this single strike against discarded tires and mattresses. Toshinori relentlessly corrected his posture, his breathing, and his hip rotation. Izuku learned to visualize the kinetic energy pooling in his core, traveling up his spine, whipping through his shoulder, and snapping out through the bladed edge of his hand. He named it Karate Chop. By the end of the third month, Izuku tested it. Toshinori had set up a stack of 3 solid concrete blocks salvaged from a demolished retaining wall. Izuku stood before them. He closed his eyes, steadying his breathing. He didn't activate guts. He didn't need pain for this. He needed focus. He dropped his weight, twisted his hips, and snapped his right hand down in a blindingly fast, horizontal arc. Crack boom! The edge of his slate blue hand struck the top block. The sheer, concentrated force of the blow didn't just break the top block. The kinetic shockwave traveled straight down, atomizing all 3 blocks into a fine, gray dust that blew away in the ocean breeze. Izuku stared at his hand in awe. It didn't even sting. Toshinori, watching from the sidelines, smiled proudly. Good. You are no longer just heavy. You are becoming a weapon. Months 4 to 6, the art of foresight. As summer bled into autumn, the temperature dropped, but Izuku's training only intensified. The beach was looking noticeably better. A large section of the shoreline was completely visible, the golden sand catching the morning light. But Izuku's combat training was hitting a wall. Again. Toshinori barked. Izuku lunged forward, throwing a heavy right hook. Toshinori, in his skeletal form, simply tilted his head 2 inches to the left. Izuku's fist sailed past, hitting nothing but air. Before Izuku could recover his balance, Toshinori's bony foot snapped up, sweeping Izuku's legs out from under him. Izuku hit the sand with a heavy thud, groaning. You are telegraphing, Izuku, Toshinori said, offering a hand to help the boy up. You have immense power, and your technique is improving. But you fight like a runaway train. You pick a target, you charge, and you strike. Against a stationary object, it's devastating. Against a living, breathing opponent with a quirk, it is suicide. Izuku dusted himself off, his blue skin flushing purple with frustration. But you're so fast, All Might. Even in this form, I can't touch you. Speed is relative, Toshinori explained, tapping his temple. I am not moving faster than your punch. I am moving before your punch. You look at my face when you fight. You look at my eyes. That is a novice mistake. Toshinori began to circle Izuku on the sand. A human body cannot lie, Izuku. If a man intends to throw a punch, his shoulder must dip. If he intends to kick, his hips must shift. If he intends to dodge, his center of gravity must move. Stop looking at my eyes. Look at my chest. Let your peripheral vision track my joints. They sparred for hours every day after the trash clearing. At first, Izuku got pummeled. He was too focused on his own attacks, his own heavy body. But slowly, a shift began to occur in his mind. Izuku was a natural analyst. He had spent his entire childhood writing in his hero analysis for the future notebooks, dissecting the quirks, movements, and strategies of pro-heroes. Now, Toshinori was asking him to apply that analytical obsession in real time, in the middle of combat. It was during a chilly November morning that it finally clicked. Toshinori lunged, feinting a left jab. Izuku's eyes didn't track the fist. He looked at Toshinori's collarbone. He noticed a lack of tension in the left pectoral muscle. It was a fake. Simultaneously, Izuku saw Toshinori's right hip rotate slightly. A right sweep kick. Instead of blocking the fake punch, Izuku abruptly stomped his heavy foot down, anchoring himself. As Toshinori's right leg swept in, Izuku used his low center of gravity and delivered a lightning-fast, precise kick to the inside of Toshinori's calf, disrupting the mentor's balance mid-attack. Low kick! Toshinori stumbled, his eyes widening in surprise as he fell backward onto the sand. Silence hung in the air for a moment. Then, Tashinori burst into a fit of booming laughter, coughing up a small amount of blood, but grinning from ear to ear. Brilliant! Absolutely brilliant! Tashinori praised, wiping his mouth. You read the kinetic chain. You didn't just dodge, you anticipated and countered using their own momentum against them. Izuku stared at his own hands, his heart pounding. The world had seemed to slow down in that split second. He had seen the movement before it happened. It wasn't magic, it was absolute, hyper-focused situational awareness. I'll call it foresight, Izuku murmured, a fierce grin spreading across his broad blue face. Months 7 to 9, the plateau. Winter arrived with a biting ferocity. Frost coated the remaining mountains of trash onto Koba Beach. The biting cold was a miserable sensation, one that constantly threatened to trigger Izuku's guts ability if he allowed his skin to freeze. To combat this, Izuku wore thick, heavy-duty sweatpants and a custom-made, heavily insulated hoodie that accommodated his cranial crests. By month 8, the beach was 70% clear. It was a staggering achievement. Izuku's body had transformed, though not in the way a normal humans would. He hadn't grown an inch. He was still a remarkably short 4'11". But his mass had increased. He now weighed a dense 180 pounds. His slate blue skin had taken on a slightly deeper, richer hue, and the muscles beneath his hide were carved from granite. He no longer looked like a heavy child. He looked like a miniature bodybuilder, an absolute powerhouse of condensed kinetic energy. But despite his progress, Izuku hit a wall. A physical, biological plateau that seemed insurmountable. It was a rusted, late-model pickup truck, half buried in the wet, freezing sand near the waterline. The engine block was solid cast iron, and the bed was filled with waterlogged concrete rubble. It conservatively weighed over 4 tons. For 2 weeks, Izuku had tried to move it. Rarark! Izuku screamed. His thick fingers dug into the rusted wheel wells of the truck. His boots were planted deep in the sand. He strained, his muscles bulging, the veins on his neck throbbing wildly. The truck groaned. The metal creaked. But it didn't budge. Izuku's hands slipped, and he fell backward into the cold sand, chest heaving, steam rising from his overheated skin. Damn it! Izuku punched the sand, creating a small crater. Damn it, damn it! Tashinori, bundled up in a thick winter coat and scarf, walked over slowly. He handed Izuku a thermos of hot tea. Drink. Izuku took it, his hands trembling with exhaustion and frustration. I can't do it, All Might. I'm strong enough to lift the engine. I'm strong enough to lift the frame. But the whole thing together, I can't get the leverage. My arms are too short to wrap around a solid grip point, and my legs aren't long enough to generate the proper upward drive. My mass-to-height ratio is working against me. Tashinori sat down on a nearby piece of driftwood, staring at the rusted truck. You are running into the upper limits of your current biological stage, Izuku. Izuku looked down. My stage? All quirks have limits, Tashinori explained, his breath pluming in the cold air. Emitter quirks overheat. Transformation quirks exhaust stamina. But mutation quirks, they are bound by the physical laws of biology. You are essentially a hyper-evolved hominid. But right now you are in an adolescent phase of your mutation. You are, for lack of a better term, unevolved. Izuku touched the 3 crests on his head. He knew what Tashinori meant. He had studied his own genetics endlessly. His body was built for combat, but it felt incomplete, like a caterpillar aware of the butterfly it was supposed to become, but trapped in the cocoon. How do I break past it? Izuku asked, his voice tight. Bakugo was right. If I'm just a heavy rock, I'll never be able to save people when it really matters. What if this truck was a collapsed building with a family trapped inside? Being short and strong isn't enough. Tashinori's eyes softened. He saw the desperation, the pure, unadulterated heroic drive in the boy's eyes. It was the same drive that had allowed Tashinori to master One for All. Izuku, do you know how muscles grow? Tashinori asked quietly. Hypertrophy, Izuku answered immediately. The muscle fibers are subjected to stress and micro-tears. The body repairs them, making them thicker and stronger to handle future stress. Exactly, Tashinori nodded. Growth requires destruction. It requires pushing the body past what it believes is a fatal limit, forcing it to adapt or die. Your mutation is no different. Your body is comfortable in its current form. It believes it is strong enough to survive. You have to convince your biology that if it does not change, if it does not evolve, you will perish. Toshinori stood up, his shadow falling over Izuku. You are trying to lift that truck with your muscles. I want you to lift it with your spirit. I want you to channel every ounce of doubt, every insult thrown at you, every fear you have of failing, and compress it into your core. Break your limit, Izuku Midoriya. Month 10, the eve of the exam. Tomorrow was the UA entrance exam. The beach was clean. It was a pristine stretch of golden sand, the ocean waves crashing gently against the shore, free of pollution for the first time in 2 decades. It was a monument to 10 months of agonizing, backbreaking labor. Except for the truck. It sat there, a rusted, stubborn monolith mocking Izuku's efforts. The sun was beginning to set, casting long, fiery orange shadows across the beach. Toshinori stood a few yards away, silent. He had not offered advice today. He had not corrected Izuku's form. Today was entirely up to the boy. Izuku stood before the truck. He had stripped off his hoodie, wearing only a tight black tank top and his heavy sweatpants. The cold February wind whipped against his slate blue skin, but he didn't feel it. He stared at the grill of the truck, a glorified paperweight. Bakugo's voice echoed in his mind. You might want to consider professional wrestling. The doctor's voice. I cannot, in good conscience, tell you that a purely physical mutation is enough. All Might's original words. Izuku closed his eyes. He reached out and grabbed the rusted underside of the truck's front bumper. The metal was freezing, rough against his callous blue hands. He dropped into a deep squat. He dug his boots into the sand, kicking away the loose top layer until he hit the compacted, wet earth beneath. He locked his spine. He drew in a massive breath, filling his lungs to maximum capacity, holding the oxygen hostage in his chest. I will not be a rock. He began to pull. The muscles in Izuku's back, massive slabs of blue corded flesh, flared outward. His biceps strained against the fabric of his tank top. The veins in his neck bulged until they looked like purple ropes. Creak! The truck groaned. The suspension whined in protest, but the tires remained firmly buried in the sand. Pull! Izuku commanded his body. He poured everything into the lift. He felt the skin on his hands tear against the rusted metal. The sharp pain flared, instantly triggering his biological defense mechanism. Guts activated. A fierce, crimson aura erupted around Izuku. His physical strength violently doubled. The sudden surge of power was like a bomb going off in his cardiovascular system. His heart slammed against his ribs at 200 beats per minute. Rayarag! Izuku roared, the sound echoing across the empty beach. The front tires of the truck lifted an inch out of the sand. 2 inches. But it wasn't enough. The sheer weight of the concrete in the back of the truck acted as an anchor, pulling the vehicle back down. The rusted bumper began to buckle under Izuku's grip, threatening to snap and drop the massive weight directly onto him. His muscles screamed. The guts enhancement was burning through his stamina at a terrifying rate. His vision began to blur at the edges, darkening with the threat of a blackout. Adapt or die, Toshinori's words echoed. Growth requires destruction. Izuku didn't let go. He refused. If his arms tore from their sockets, he would not let go. He pushed his consciousness deep into his own biology, screaming at his DNA, demanding more. Demanding change. He needed to be bigger. He needed to be stronger. He needed to be a hero. Suddenly, something inside Izuku snapped. It wasn't a bone or a muscle. It felt like a lock breaking deep within his cellular structure. The crimson aura of his guts ability violently shifted. The red hue was consumed by a blinding, brilliant, incandescent white light. Toshinori, watching from afar, threw his arms up to shield his eyes. What in the world? The white light erupted from Izuku's skin, illuminating the twilight beach like a fallen star. It was a radiant, pure energy that defied explanation. Within the cocoon of light, Izuku felt an impossible sensation. His bones felt like magma. His muscles felt like they were expanding, weaving new, denser fibers at a cellular level. He felt himself growing. The white light pulsed, a rhythmic heartbeat of raw evolutionary power. Izuku opened his eyes. They were glowing completely white. Seismic. Toss. Izuku's voice was different. It was deeper, layered with a resonant, booming bass that shook the sand beneath his feet. With a monumental surge of newfound, incomprehensible strength, Izuku didn't just lift the truck. He ripped it from the earth. The massive, 4-ton vehicle was hoisted entirely over Izuku's head. The white light flared to a blinding crescendo. Izuku twisted his hips, utilizing the perfect technique Toshinori had drilled into him, and hurled the truck backward. The truck flew through the air, traveling 20 feet before crashing into the disposal zone with an earth-shattering crunch of bending metal and shattering glass. Silence fell over the beach. The white light surrounding Izuku flickered, stuttered, and then violently collapsed back into his body. Izuku gasped, his eyes returning to their normal emerald green. The sudden absence of the evolutionary energy left him reeling. His body felt heavy, heavier than ever before. He stumbled forward, dropping to his hands and knees in the sand, panting wildly. He looked at his hands. They were the same slate blue. He looked down at his body. He was still 4'11". The evolution hadn't completed. The white light had provided a temporary, explosive surge of biological power, but the permanent metamorphosis had aborted at the last second, lacking some final, crucial catalyst. But the truck was moved. Footsteps crunched heavily in the sand. Toshinori, having instinctively transformed into his muscle-bound All Might form upon seeing the blinding light, stood over the boy. All Might looked at the crushed truck, then down at Izuku. The number one hero's face was a mask of utter astonishment. Young Midoriya. All Might rumbled, his voice quiet with awe. What was that light? Izuku sat back on his heels, wiping the sweat from his brow. A weary, victorious smile broke across his face. I don't know, Izuku breathed, looking up at his mentor. But I think I'm getting closer. I think my body is trying to evolve. All Might stared at the boy. For 10 months, he had pushed Izuku to the brink of physical exhaustion. He had expected to forge a master martial artist out of a mutant boy. But he had not expected this. He had not expected a quirk to possess the literal capacity for biological ascension. All Might looked out over the beach. The rising moon reflected off the pristine, dark waters. The garbage was gone. The impossible task was completed. Look out there, young Midoriya, All Might said softly, pointing to the horizon. Izuku turned his head. The beach was beautiful. It was a sight that hadn't been seen in years. And he had done it. With his own 2 hands he had restored a piece of the world. You did this, All Might said, pride swelling in his massive chest. You didn't need explosions. You didn't need a flashy meta-quirk. You used your strength, your sweat, and your unbroken will. You are not a rock, Izuku. You are a diamond. Unbreakable, and forged under pressure. Izuku felt the tears welling up, but this time, he didn't cry. He felt a profound sense of peace settling into his bones. His muscles ached, his skin was bruised, and he was exhausted to his very core. But he was ready. All Might extended a massive hand. Izuku reached up and gripped it. All Might hauled him to his feet. Tomorrow is the entrance exam, All Might said, his signature grin returning in full force. You have broken your limit, Izuku. The seed of your evolution has been planted. Now, it is time to show the world the fruits of your labor. Go home. Eat a massive meal. Sleep. Izuku nodded, grabbing his backpack from the sand. He turned and bowed deeply to his mentor. Thank you, All Might. For everything. Do not thank me yet, All Might laughed, the sound booming over the crashing waves. You still have to pass. Give them hell, young Midoriya. Izuku turned and began the walk home. He flexed his hands as he walked, feeling the residual warmth of the white light lingering deep within his marrow. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring. He didn't know what kind of robots or challenges awaited him at UA High. But as he looked up at the starry sky, his 3 crests catching the moonlight, he knew one thing for certain. He was going to punch a hole straight through their expectations. The morning of the UA High School entrance exam brought a crisp, biting chill to the air, but Izuku Midoriya was practically radiating heat. Standing before the towering, H-shaped monolithic main building of the most prestigious hero academy in Japan, Izuku felt a profound sense of gravity. This was it. The culmination of 10 months of agonizing, bone-breaking, muscle-tearing labor. He looked down at his hands, thick slate blue, with 3 blunt fingers and a thumb. They were heavily calloused, rough as sandpaper from moving thousands of tons of garbage, but they were steady. No trembling. No hesitation. He was wearing his specially tailored exam outfit, a pair of dark green, heavy-duty cargo pants woven with elastic polymer fibers to accommodate his dense thighs, and a reinforced black, sleeveless compression shirt. He needed his arms free. Any standard sleeves would just rip the moment his muscles flexed. Stupid Deku. Don't block the gate. The voice was like dragging a rusted nail across a chalkboard. Izuku didn't flinch. He slowly turned his head, his 3 cranial crests shifting. Katsuki Bakugo stood a few paces away, his hands shoved deep into the pockets of his baggy uniform pants, his crimson eyes narrowed in a mixture of contempt and underlying confusion. Bakugo hadn't seen Izuku since the sludge villain incident 10 months ago. They went to the same middle school, but Izuku had strategically avoided him, spending every waking hour at Takoba Beach. Bakugo's eyes flicked over Izuku's physique. The slate blue boy hadn't grown any taller. He was still a laughably short 4'11". But there was something undeniably different about his presence. He was wider. His posture was no longer hunched in submissive fear. His spine was ramrod straight, and the sheer density of the muscles packing his short frame was impossible to ignore. He looked like a miniature, unmovable mountain. "I'm not blocking the gate, Kaken," Izuku replied evenly, his voice calm, lacking its usual stutter. "There's plenty of room." Bakugo's jaw clenched. A tiny pop of an explosion echoed in his right pocket. "Don't get a big head just because you threw a rock at a villain, you heavy freak. UA isn't looking for construction workers. They're looking for heroes. You're going to fail." Bakugo shouldered his way past, intentionally bumping his arm against Izuku. But instead of Izuku stumbling, it was Bakugo who bounced off, his shoulder jarring as if he had just walked into a solid steel pillar. Bakugo clicked his tongue, masking a wince, and stormed ahead toward the auditorium. Izuku watched him go, feeling a strange sense of detachment. The fear that used to paralyze him in Bakugo's presence was gone. It had been replaced by the quiet, absolute confidence of a body that had been broken down and rebuilt by All Might himself. Izuku took a deep breath, stepping forward onto the pristine walkway leading to the main doors. "All right. Step 1. Get inside without." His heavy, steel-toed combat boot caught the edge of a slightly raised paving stone. With his center of gravity thrown off and his 180-pound mass propelling him forward, Izuku pitched forward. He braced for the impact, preparing to catch himself, but the impact never came. He froze, hovering an inch above the concrete. "Are you okay?" a bright, cheerful voice asked. Izuku blinked, his heavy body entirely weightless. He rotated midair, a comical sight for someone so dense, and found himself looking at a girl with a bob of chestnut hair, rosy cheeks, and large, warm brown eyes. She had one hand pressed together with the other, a soft pink glow emanating from her fingertips. "It's my quirk. Sorry for using it on you without asking," she smiled, bringing her hands together and releasing the effect. Izuku dropped the final inch, his boots hitting the pavement with a heavy, resonant thud that made the girl blink in surprise. "Wow, you're heavier than you look." Thank you," Izuku stammered, his slate blue cheeks flushing a dark purple. "I'm a mutation type. Dense muscles. If I fell, I probably would have cracked the pavement. I'm Ochiko Uraraka." She beamed, unfazed by his unusual, crested appearance. "I was super nervous, but catching you kind of helped me relax. Let's do our best today, okay?" She waved, jogging ahead toward the auditorium. Izuku stood there, utterly paralyzed. "I just talked to a girl. A nice girl. She didn't call me a walking brick." With his morale suddenly skyrocketing, Izuku marched into the building. The orientation in the massive auditorium was a sensory overload. The voice hero, Present Mike, stood on the stage, projecting his booming voice to explain the practical exam. Izuku sat in the middle row, scribbling furiously in a brand new notebook. "So, it's a faux urban setting, Izuku muttered to himself, his analytical mind kicking into overdrive. 3 types of villain bots worth 1, 2, and 3 points. A 10-minute time limit. It's an extermination race. But, Izuku chewed the end of his pencil, his brow furrowing. This is heavily biased toward emitter quirks and ranged fighters. Someone who can shoot lasers or explosions can wipe out multiple targets from down a street. I have to close the distance. I have to run up to every single one and destroy them hand to hand. My time to kill ratio is going to be significantly lower because of travel time. Excuse me. A tall, broad-shouldered boy with glasses and meticulously combed dark blue hair suddenly stood up, pointing rigidly at Izuku. You, the boy with the blue skin and the crests. You have been muttering nonstop for the past 5 minutes. This is the most prestigious academy in the nation. If you cannot take this seriously and respect your fellow examinees, you should leave immediately. Izuku froze as hundreds of eyes turned toward him. He felt a spike of anxiety. But then he remembered the beach. He remembered All Might's brutal sparring sessions. I am a diamond. I apologize for the distraction, Izuku said, his voice carrying surprisingly well. I was just calculating the time-to-distance ratio required for melee-focused quirks to compete with ranged emitters in an urban extermination setting. I will keep my strategies internal from now on. The blue-haired boy blinked, slightly taken aback by the highly technical and calm response. I see. Well, as long as you are aware. Thank you. He sat back down. President Mike coughed into his microphone. Right, well. Moving on. There is one more robot. The 0-pointer. An arena trap. It's not worth any points, so if you see it, my advice is to run away. An obstacle, Izuku thought. Something to test situational awareness. Got it. Battle Center B. The gates to the foe's city were colossal. Towering metal doors that looked like they belonged on a military fortress separated the examinees from their test. Izuku stood in the middle of the crowd, rolling his thick shoulders. His joints popped with loud, dense cracks, a sound like stones grinding together. He took deep breaths, visualizing the kinetic chain Tashinori had taught him. Hips. Core. Spine. Shoulders. Strike. The blue-haired boy with the glasses, who Izuku noticed had engines protruding from his calves, walked up to him. I see you are attempting to focus. I apologize for my outburst in the auditorium. I merely expect the highest standards. I am Tenya Ida, Izuku Midoriya. Izuku nodded respectfully. No apology needed. You were right. Focus is everything. Right, listen up, listeners. President Mick's voice blasted from hidden speakers. There are no countdowns in real battles. The exam begins. Now, the massive metal doors began to slowly grind open. The crowd of examinees stood frozen, waiting for the doors to fully part. But Izuku didn't wait. Before the doors were even halfway open, Izuku dropped his center of gravity. His thick, trunk-like thighs coiled like massive springs. Boom! The concrete beneath Izuku's boots spiderwebbed, and he launched himself through the narrow gap in the doors like a slate-blue cannonball. The sheer explosive force of his start left the other teenagers staring in shock. What are you waiting for? President Mike yelled. The blue kid has the right idea. Run! Izuku hit the ground running inside the foe's city. The streets were identical to a standard metropolitan district. Tall buildings, intersections, parked dummy cars. Target acquired. To his left, rolling out of an alleyway, was a one-pointer. It was a sleek, mono-wheeled robot with a singular red optic sensor and a pair of bladed arms. Target locked, the robot's synthesized voice buzzed, raising its blades. Izuku didn't slow down. He closed the 30-yard distance in a matter of seconds. The robot swung a blade down. Foresight. Izuku watched the robot's shoulder actuator shift. He didn't look at the blade. He watched the joint. He stepped perfectly to the right, slipping under the downward slash by a fraction of an inch. As he stepped in, Izuku drew his right arm back, flattening his hand, tucking his thumb. He channeled his mass into his hips, rotating sharply. Karate chop! His bladed hand struck the robot's midsection. The kinetic force unleashed from his dense, accelerated musculature cleaved straight through the steel plating as if it were wet cardboard. The shockwave ripped out the back of the robot, tearing its internal wiring to shreds. The one-pointer sparked, its chassis splitting in half before it crashed to the pavement. 1 point. Keep moving! Izuku pivoted, sprinting down the main avenue. A 2-pointer emerged from a storefront, a scorpion-like machine with heavy armor plating and a tail gun. It fired a barrage of rubber-coated riot bullets. Izuku crossed his thick arms over his face, charging headlong into the fire. The bullets struck his slate-blue skin and simply bounced off, barely stinging. His hide was too dense, hardened by 10 months of brutal conditioning in freezing water and jagged metal. He reached the 2-pointer. He knew Karate Chop might not cleanly cut through the rounded, heavy armor of this model. He needed a strike designed to shatter, to break rigid defenses. Izuku clenched his right hand into a massive fist. He stepped forward, driving his rear leg into the ground, and thrust his fist forward in a rigid, piston-like punch, channeling all his kinetic force into his knuckles. Brick break. His fist slammed into the center of the Scorpion bot's reinforced faceplate. The armor didn't just dent, it shattered like glass. The blunt force trauma blew the robot's internal processors to pieces, sending the machine flipping backward. 3 points. Better. But not fast enough. Suddenly, a brilliant beam of naval laser fire cut across the street, instantly annihilating 3 one-pointers that had been moving toward Izuku. Merci for the distraction, monsieur. A blond boy in a sparkling belt called out from a rooftop, striking a pose before jumping to the next building. Izuku gritted his teeth. I was right. They're kill-stealing from a distance. I have to increase my pace. I can't let them clear the streets before I get there. Izuku pushed his body harder. He abandoned the main roads, utilizing the alleyways. He bounced off dumpsters, using his incredible leg strength to scale walls and launch himself from fire escapes onto passing robots. He fought with a feral, mechanical efficiency. Duck. Karate chop. 4 points. Pivot. Brick break. 6 points. Low kick to shatter treads. Karate chop to finish. 9 points. He was a blur of blue muscle, a wrecking ball of martial arts tearing through the metal opposition. But time was ticking. 6 minutes had passed. He was up to 34 points. He didn't know the passing threshold, but he knew the emitter students had to be in the 50s or 60s by now. He was sweating, his muscles burning from the relentless sprinting. The sheer mass of his body made long-term cardio exhausting. He was approaching the stamina limits All Might had warned him about. 34, Izuku panted, hiding behind a burned-out car to catch his breath. I need more. I need at least 50 to be safe. He stood up, preparing to dive back into the main street. Then, the ground stopped shaking from explosions, and began to shudder from something else entirely. The observation room. High above the battle centers, in a darkened room lined with monitors, the faculty of UA High watched the exams. This year's crop is quite promising, Midnight purred, tapping her chin as she watched a monitor displaying Bakugo blasting a 3-pointer to Ash. That explosive boy in Center A has a vicious instinct. Indeed, Snipe agreed, tipping his cowboy hat. But look at Center B. That blonde kid with the naval laser has some decent range. And the Ida boy is using his mobility perfectly. In the corner of the room, standing behind the glowing screens, a skeletal Tashinori Yagi watched Monitor 4B with unblinking intensity. On the screen, Izuku was tearing through robots with raw, unpolished, but devastatingly effective martial arts. Eraserhead, a small, bear-mouse dog creature, Principal Nizu said, sipping from a teacup. You've been watching the boy with the physical mutation in Center B. What are your thoughts? Shota Aizawa, wrapped in his signature yellow sleeping bag, stared at the screen through half-lidded eyes. Midoriya Izuku. Quirk registry listed as a standard fighting-type mutation, but his physical output is highly irregular for his mass. He's only 4'11", yet his strikes are generating kinetic shockwaves capable of atomizing Grade 3 steel armor. He fights like a seasoned brawler, but with the tactical restraint of a martial artist, Blood King noted. It's a strange combination. But he's slowing down. Melee fighters always struggle in this format. They just can't cover the ground fast enough. Let us see how they respond to the true test of heroism. Then, Niza smiled, his paw hovering over a large red button on the console. It is time to separate the heroes from the glory seekers. Misa pressed the button. Battle Center B. Rumble. It wasn't a localized tremor. It was a massive, city-wide earthquake. Izuku stumbled, using a street lamp to steady himself. The sky above the foe city suddenly darkened. Glass from the surrounding buildings shattered, raining down on the streets. At the far end of the central avenue, a building exploded outward. From the smoke and debris rose a machine of unimaginable proportions. It dwarfed the skyscrapers around it, a colossal behemoth of gray steel and glowing red sensors. One of its massive, tank-like treads crushed a 3-story building flat with a sickening crunch. The zero-pointer. Less than 2 minutes remaining. President Mick's voice echoed over the sirens. Panic erupted. The examinees, who had been confidently destroying the smaller robots moments before, froze in absolute terror. Are you kidding me? A boy with extending fingers screamed. That thing is a skyscraper. Run! Retreat! It's an obstacle. Just run away! Ida yelled, his calf engines roaring as he sprinted past Izuku in the opposite direction. Izuku stood frozen in the middle of the street. The sheer scale of the zero-pointer triggered every biological flight or fight response in his body, and right now, his biology was screaming at him to flee. This was not an enemy he could punch. This was a walking natural disaster. He's right. It's 0 points. Running is the logical choice. I need to find more one-pointers. Izuku turned his back on the behemoth. He took one step in retreat. Ow, my ankle. The voice was faint, drowned out by the grinding gears of the colossal robot. But Izuku heard it. His 3 crests twitched, picking up the frequency of human distress. He stopped. He looked back over his thick shoulder. 50 yards away, sitting helplessly in the path of the zero-pointer's advancing tread, was the girl with the chestnut hair. Uraraka. A massive chunk of concrete debris had fallen from a crushed building, pinning her right leg to the asphalt. She was frantically pressing her glowing fingertips against the debris, but she was exhausted, her quirk sputtering out. The zero-pointer's shadow fell over her. Izuku didn't think. He didn't calculate the point spread. He didn't care about the exam, the time limit, or the logic of the situation. He saw someone who needed to be saved. His feet moved on their own. With a roar that tore from his throat, Izuku abandoned his retreat and sprinted directly toward the colossal machine. What is he doing? Ida shouted, looking back as he ran. He'll be crushed. Izuku closed the distance, his heavy boots destroying the pavement with every stride. He reached Uraraka, sliding to his knees beside the debris pinning her leg. I've got you! Izuku yelled over the deafening roar of the robot. He wedged his thick, blue hands under the concrete slab. He braced his legs and pulled. The concrete shifted, lifting an inch, but it was massive, easily weighing 2 tons, and positioned awkwardly. No, run! Uraraka cried, tears streaming down her soot-stained cheeks. It's too close. You have to run! Izuku looked up. The massive metal tread of the zero-pointer, the size of a city block, was descending. It would crush them both in seconds. He couldn't move the rock fast enough. If he stayed on the ground, they died. Adapt or die. All Might's words from the beach echoed in his skull. The truck on the beach. The feeling of his limits breaking. Izuku let go of the concrete. He stood up, placing himself squarely between the trapped girl and the descending tread. He looked up at the head of the zero-pointer, hundreds of feet in the air. He couldn't reach it. He was too small. He was too short. Despair threatened to choke him. He was going to fail. He was going to die here, and he was going to let this girl die because he wasn't strong enough, because he was just a glorified paperweight. No! The emotional anguish, the sheer, unadulterated terror of failing to save a life, spiked Izuku's adrenaline past a threshold he had never reached before. It wasn't physical pain triggering his gut's ability this time. It was an absolute, fundamental rejection of his own biological limitations. Deep within his cellular structure, the lock that had cracked on the beach finally, violently, shattered. It began in his chest. A blinding, searing point of pure white light ignited beneath his skin. It didn't pulse. It exploded outward, instantly consuming his entire body in a cocoon of incandescent, radiant energy. What What is happening? Uraraka shielded her eyes, the sheer brightness of the light pushing back the shadows of the falling tread. The observation room. The monitors for Center B whited out entirely, static hissing violently from the speakers. What the hell was that? Aizawa bolted upright in his chair, his quirk-erasing eyes flashing red, but he couldn't see through the blinding light on the screen. A secondary quirk? An explosion? Toshinori Yagi gripped the edge of the console, his skeletal knuckles turning white. He knew that light. But this time, it wasn't flickering. It was stable. It was ascending. He is breaking through, Toshinori whispered, a fierce, feral smile spreading across his gaunt face. Battle Center B inside the light. Izuka couldn't see, but he could feel. It was absolute agony and absolute euphoria combined. His skeleton felt like it was melting and reforming simultaneously. The compact, compressed bones of his 4'11" frame elongated with sickening cracks and pops that were drowned out by the roar of the energy. His spine stretched, pulling his torso upward. His femurs and tibias lengthened, thrusting him higher into the air. The muscle mass that had been so tightly condensed in his Machamp form suddenly expanded, engorging with hyperdense fibers. His shoulders broadened exponentially, becoming massive slabs of power. His arms lengthened, the biceps and triceps swelling to the size of artillery shells. The color of his skin, previously a matte slate blue, deepened rapidly. It darkened, saturating into a rich, bruised, grayish-purple hue. The three crests on his head sharpened, becoming more pronounced, more aggressive. But the most shocking change was biological hardware. As his internal energy output skyrocketed to catastrophic levels, his genetics forced a limiter into existence. A thick, bioorganic mass of hardened keratin and gold-hued energy manifested around his waist, weaving itself into a massive, heavily buckled, belt-like structure. It cinched tightly, forcibly containing the overflowing kinetic energy that threatened to tear his new body apart. The power save belt. The white light shattered like glass. Where the short, heavy Machamp had stood, a titan now remained. Izuka Midoriya stood at an imposing 6'2". He was a mountain of purple-gray muscle, radiating an aura of sheer, unadulterated power. His custom uniform shirt was entirely annihilated, leaving him bare-chested, the golden power save belt gleaming at his waist. His heavy cargo pants had stretched to their absolute limits, ending in ragged tears just below his knees. He opened his eyes. They were no longer the soft, round emeralds of a boy. They were sharper, fiercer, glowing with an intense, focused white light. He was no longer a Machamp. He had achieved his first evolution. He was Mach-Hoke. The tread of the zero-pointer was only 50 feet above him now. Izuka didn't just bend his knees, he coiled his new, massive frame. The earth beneath his boots didn't just crack, it completely liquefied under the pressure. With a thunderous, sonic boom that blew the surrounding cars away and shattered every remaining window on the block, Izuka leaped. He shot upward like a purple-gray missile. The sheer velocity of his jump tore a trench in the air itself, creating a slipstream that sent debris flying. He bypassed the descending tread, rocketing straight up the colossal chassis of the zero-pointer. 100 feet. 200. He reached the head of the machine, hovering face-to-face with the glowing red optic sensors of the behemoth. Izuka pulled his right arm back. The muscles in his massive back shifted like tectonic plates. The golden belt at his waist pulsed fiercely, barely containing the kinetic force channeling into his fist. This wasn't a precision strike. This wasn't karate chop or brick break. He needed absolute, chaotic destruction. He needed to hit so hard that the concept of armor ceased to matter. Guts activated. The crimson aura flared beneath his new, purple skin, mixing with the residual white evolutionary energy. His strength, already exponentially multiplied by his new form, doubled again. Dynamic. Punch! Izuka's voice was unrecognizable. It was a booming, seismic roar that echoed across the entire battle center. He drove his fist forward. When his knuckles made contact with the steel face of the zero-pointer, there was no sound of metal breaking. There was only a deafening, reality-warping boom, like a localized nuclear detonation. The sheer kinetic force of the dynamic punch didn't just break the armor. It created a chaotic, spiraling shockwave that completely bypassed the exterior plating and ravaged the machine's interior. The entire head of the zero-pointer crumpled inward like a tin can crushed by a god. The shockwave blew out the back of the robot's neck, severing its central spinal column in an explosion of sparks, oil, and shrapnel. The massive machine's eyes flickered, died, and the behemoth began to fall backward, away from Uraraka and the street below. Izuku hovered in the air for a fraction of a second, his fist still extended, steam rolling off his massive, purple shoulders. Then, gravity reclaimed him. He plummeted toward the earth. With his new mass, he easily weighed over 300 pounds now. The fall was fast. He twisted midair, landing squarely on his feet in the center of the street. Crash! The asphalt cratered around him upon impact, a cloud of dust billowing outward. The zero-pointer crashed into a row of faux skyscrapers behind him, the resulting explosion sending a rush of hot wind over the exam grounds. Silence fell over Battle Center B. The dust slowly cleared. Izuku stood in the center of the crater. His chest heaved. He looked down at his hands. They were massive. His arms were thicker than his old thighs had been. He reached down and touched the golden, bioorganic belt around his waist. It felt hard, like bone, but pulsed with warmth. He looked over his shoulder. The concrete slab that had trapped Uraraka had been completely shattered by the ambient shockwave of his launch. The girl was sitting up, completely unharmed, her large brown eyes wide with absolute, breathless awe as she stared at the giant, purple-skinned teenager. Izuku opened his mouth to ask if she was okay, but a loud, piercing buzzer suddenly echoed across the city. "Time's up!" Present Mick's voice rang out. "The exam is officially over." The adrenaline crash hit Izuku like a freight train. The guts aura vanished, and the immense strain of the evolution, combined with the dynamic punch, caught up to him all at once. His vision swam. His new, massive legs trembled, and Izuku collapsed onto his back in the crater, staring up at the smoke-filled sky. "Did I pass?" He wondered vaguely, his heavy eyelids drooping. "I only had 34 points. Footsteps rapidly approached. Uraraka limped over, dropping to her knees beside him. "Hey! Are you okay?" she asked frantically, hovering her hands over his massive, bruised chest. That was the most amazing thing I've ever seen. You saved me." "Thank you?" Izuku managed a weak, rumbling chuckle, his new voice vibrating in his chest. "You're welcome. Just returning the favor from the gate." Well, what a mess. An elderly woman in a lab coat, using a large syringe as a walking stick, hobbled through the crowd of stunned examinees that had gathered around the crater. "Recovery girl." She looked at the decapitated zero-pointer in the distance, then looked down at the massive, purple-gray teenager lying in the rubble. "A spontaneous mutation evolution during an exam?" Recovery girl whistled, adjusting her visor. "I haven't seen one of those in decades. The cellular strain must be astronomical. You're lucky this belt manifested, Sonny, or your muscles would have torn themselves off your skeleton with that punch." She leaned down, extending her lips, and planted a kiss on Izuku's thick forehead. Instantly, a wave of soothing, regenerative energy washed over him. His torn muscle fibers knitted back together, the bruises faded, and his stamina slowly replenished. Izuku sat up, groaning as his new joints popped. He looked around. The other students were staring at him. Ida was standing at the edge of the crater, his jaw hanging slightly open, adjusting his glasses in disbelief. The blond boy with the naval laser was completely silent. They weren't looking at him like he was a glorified paperweight. They were looking at him with respect, with awe, and perhaps a healthy dose of fear. Izuku stood up. He towered over almost everyone now. He looked down at his massive hands, closing them into fists. The power coursing through his veins was intoxicating. He didn't know if 34 points was enough. But as he looked at Uraraka's grateful smile, he knew he had done what All Might had asked of him. He hadn't been a rock. He had been a hero. And as he walked out of the faux city, his heavy boots shaking the ground with every step, Izuku Midoriya realized that his life, his body, his power, and his destiny had irrevocably evolved. The Midoriya household was not built for a titan. Crack. "Oh dear." Izuku mumbled, his voice a deep, vibrating baritone that rattled the thin glass of the bathroom mirror. He stared down at his right hand. Resting in his thick, purplish-gray palm was the shattered remains of his toothbrush. The plastic handle had completely snapped under his grip, the bristles mashed flat against his calloused thumb. It had been exactly 1 week since the UA entrance exam. 1 week since the spontaneous, violent biological ascension that had transformed him from a heavy, 4'11" Mac hop into a towering, 6'2" Mac Hoke. Izuku sighed, carefully dropping the broken plastic into the trash can. He looked up at his reflection. It was still jarring. The boy staring back at him was a mountain of corded, hyperdense muscle. His skin was a rich, bruised purple-gray. The 3 fleshy crests atop his head were sharper, angled back aggressively like a crown. His shoulders were so broad he had to turn sideways just to walk through the hallway doors of their small apartment. And then there was the belt. Resting snugly around his waist, resting directly against his skin beneath the hem of his oversized t-shirt, was a massive, golden, bioorganic belt. It looked like the championship belt of a heavyweight wrestler, complete with a large, glowing central buckle. It wasn't something he had put on, it had grown out of him during his evolution, a literal, biological limiter. He could feel it working. Without the belt, the sheer volume of kinetic energy his new musculature generated felt like a boiling kettle ready to explode. The belt clamped down on that energy, regulating it, siphoning the excess heat and force so his body wouldn't tear itself apart. Even with the limiter, his baseline strength was terrifying, hence the shattered toothbrush. "Izuku, honey? Breakfast is ready," his mother's voice called from the kitchen. "Coming, Mom!" Izuku called back, wincing as his booming voice vibrated the floorboards. He stepped out of the bathroom, carefully turning sideways to clear the doorframe, and walked into the small kitchen/living area. Inko Midoriya stood by the stove, flipping a pancake. When she turned around, she still had to crane her neck upward to look at her son. Her eyes, so similar to his own, were filled with a mixture of absolute awe, lingering shock, and overwhelming maternal pride. When Izuku had come home from the exam, stumbling through the front door, covered in dust, and a 1.5 feet taller, Inko had fainted entirely. It had taken an hour of frantic explaining, and a phone call to a very baffled emergency quirk physician, to calm her down. "I made extra," Inko smiled warmly, gesturing to a stack of pancakes that looked more like a small mountain. "You're burning through calories at an incredible rate since the change." "Thanks, Mom," Izuku smiled, pulling out a chair at the dining table. He sat down very, very slowly, listening for the telltale groan of stressed wood. The chair held barely. He picked up his fork, holding it delicately between his thick thumb and forefinger like a jeweler holding a pair of tweezers. He began to eat, his mind racing. Today was the day the UA acceptance letters were supposed to arrive. He had calculated the points 100 times in his head. He had 34 villain points. It was a decent score, but for UA? It was borderline. The destruction of the zero-pointer had felt incredible, a true validation of his power, but President Mike had explicitly said it was worth 0 points. Did I ruin my chances by wasting time on it? Izuku thought, swallowing a mouthful of pancakes. No. Uraraka was trapped. I'd do it again. Even if it costs me my dream, saving her was the right thing to do. As if on cue, the mail slot in the front door clattered. Inko jumped, nearly dropping her spatula. She hurried to the door, scooping up the mail. She sifted through the bills and flyers until she stopped, her breath catching in her throat. She held up a thick, cream-colored envelope sealed with a red wax stamp bearing the UA insignia. "Izuku," she whispered, her hands trembling. "It's here." Izuku stood up, abandoning his breakfast. He walked over, his heavy footsteps thudding against the floor. He took the envelope from his mother's shaking hands. His massive, callous thumb gently traced the wax seal. He walked to his bedroom, giving his mother a reassuring look. "I'll open it in here." He closed his door, gently, and sat on the edge of his bed, which let out a loud creak in protest. He carefully tore the top of the envelope off, ensuring he didn't rip the contents. A small metal disc slid out, landing softly on his desk. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, a holographic projection sprang to life from the disc, illuminating his all-might-postered room in a soft blue light. "I am here as a projection," Izuku gasped. It was All Might. But not the skeletal Tashinori Yagi he had trained with on the beach. This was the muscle-bound pro-hero, wearing a bright yellow suit with a matching tie. Young Midoriya! The hologram boomed, pointing directly at the camera. Apologies for not contacting you sooner. The truth is, I have been quite busy. I have officially accepted a teaching position at UA High School. Izuku's eyes widened. All Might was teaching at UA? He would get to see his mentor every day. You did excellently on the written exam, young Midoriya. All Might continued, the camera shifting to show a scoreboard. However, your practical score was 34 villain points, a respectable number, but unfortunately it placed you just below the passing threshold for the hero course. Izuku's massive chest tightened. The air left his lungs. Below the threshold. He had failed. All the training, the evolution, the beach, it wasn't enough. Or so you might think. All Might suddenly shouted, leaning into the camera with a massive grin. But a hero course that only rewards destruction is no hero course at all. The hologram shifted, playing a video clip. It was from the exam. It showed Izuku, still in his Mach-Hop form, sprinting toward the colossal zero-pointer. It showed Uraraka trapped under the rubble. And then, it showed the blinding flash of white light, Izuku's violent evolution, and the godlike dynamic punch that shattered the machine. You see, young Midoriya, Yui isn't just looking for fighters. We are looking for those who risk their lives to save others. This is a hero academy, and how could we reject someone who exemplifies the very essence of heroism? A new scoreboard appeared on the screen. Rescue points. All Might declared. Awarded by a panel of judges for acts of selflessness and bravery. Izuku Midoriya. 60 rescue points. Izuku stared at the screen, his breath hitching. 34 villain points. 60 rescue points. A combined score of 94 points. All Might announced proudly. You placed first overall, young Midoriya. First place. The tears came suddenly, and with tremendous force. Izuku covered his face with his massive, purple-gray hands, weeping openly. The sound of his crying was deep, a booming, rumbling sob of pure relief and joy. Come, young Midoriya, All Might's hologram said softly, his towering figure looking directly into the camera. This is your hero academia. The projection faded. Izuku sat there in the dark, the tears rolling down his thick cheeks. He had done it. He had actually done it. The door to his room burst open. Inko stood there, tears already streaming down her face, a box of tissues clutched in her hands. Izuku? She asked, her voice trembling. Izuku looked up, flashing a massive, watery smile that showed off his blunt, square teeth. I passed, Mom. I'm going to UA. Inko wailed, running across the room and throwing her arms around her massive son. Izuku gently hugged her back, being incredibly mindful of his strength, letting the warmth of the moment wash over him. 2 weeks later, the first day of school, standing before the towering glass gates of UA High School, Izuku felt entirely out of place, yet exactly where he belonged. He was wearing the standard UA uniform, gray blazer, white button-up shirt, red tie, and dark green pants. However, acquiring a uniform that actually fit him had been a logistical nightmare for the school's tailoring department. The blazer had to be custom woven with industrial-grade elastic fibers. The shoulders were comically broad, tailored to accommodate his massive deltoids. His tie looked incredibly small against his thick, corded neck. But the most noticeable alteration was his midsection. The white dress shirt and gray blazer were both tailored to end abruptly just above his waist, exposing the massive, golden power save belt that rested against his purple skin. He couldn't wear anything over the belt. The bioorganic material radiated a constant, low-level heat as it regulated his kinetic energy, and standard fabrics would either melt or severely chafe his skin. As he walked through the front gates, the sea of incoming freshmen parted like the Red Sea. Whoa, look at that guy, a student whispered, pointing at Izuku's 3 crests. Is he a third year? He's huge, look at his skin. What kind of quirk makes you look like a pro wrestler? Izuku kept his eyes forward, though his slate-gray face flushed a deep, embarrassed purple. He was used to being stared at, but usually because he was the shortest kid in the room. Now, he commanded the space. His heavy combat boots, custom-made steel-toed boots that could withstand his own kicking force, thudded loudly against the polished tile of the main hallway. He navigated the labyrinthine corridors until he found his destination. A massive door, easily 20 feet tall, painted with a bold red 1A, Class 1A. This is it. Izuku reached out, gripping the oversized handle. He applied the absolute minimum amount of force necessary, paranoid he would rip the door off its hinges. The door slid open smoothly. He stepped inside. The classroom was already half full. It was a cacophony of different voices, appearances, and energies. But the moment Izuku stepped through the door, ducking his head slightly despite the tall frame, the room fell silent. 20 pairs of eyes snapped toward him. Standing near the front podium was Tenya Ida, the blue-haired boy with engines in his legs. He was currently in the middle of reprimanding someone for putting their feet on the desk. The person with their feet on the desk was Katsuki Bakugo. Bakugo, who had been sneering at Ida, froze. His crimson eyes slowly tracked from the doorway, up the massive, purple-gray torso, past the golden belt, all the way up to the 3 cranial crests. Midoriya! Ida barked, snapping out of his shock. He marched over to Izuku with rigid, robotic steps. It is good to see you. I must formally apologize. Izuku blinked, looking down at Ida. Apologize? For what, Ida-kun? During the practical exam, I misjudged you entirely. Ida declared, bowing at a perfect 90-degree angle. I saw the 0-pointer and ran. But you recognized the hidden test. You saw that a fellow examinee was in danger, and you risked everything to save her. Furthermore, that spontaneous physical evolution, it was breathtaking. You embody the true spirit of a hero, and I admit, you are currently my superior. Izuku waved his massive hands frantically, terrified by the sudden praise. And no, Ida, you've got it all wrong. I didn't know it was a hidden test. My body just moved on its own. And the evolution, I didn't plan it, Deku. The voice was low, laced with a venomous disbelief that bordered on hysteria. Izuku looked past Ida. Katsuki Bakugo was standing up. His chair screeched against the floor as he kicked it back. The ash-blonde boy's face was a mask of absolute fury, but beneath it, there was something else. Confusion. Betrayal. 10 months ago, Deku was a pathetic, 4'11" pebble with a useless quirk. Today, Deku was a towering, heavily muscled behemoth that looked like he could bench press a tank. What the hell is this? Bakugo demanded, marching down the aisle, small sparks popping off his palms. What kind of trick is this, you damn nerd? You hit a growth spurt? You think looking like a steroid-pumped freak makes you better than me? Izuku looked down at Bakugo. It was a surreal feeling. For his entire life, he had looked up at Katsuki Bakugo. He had cowered under his shadow. Now, Bakugo had to tilt his head back just to meet Izuku's eyes. It's not a trick, Kaken, Izuku said, his voice a deep, resonant rumble that seemed to vibrate the windows of the classroom. My quirk is a mutation. Mutations evolve under extreme biological stress. It happened during the exam. Don't give me that scientific bullshit. Bakugo yelled, pointing an explosive finger at Izuku's chest. You were a pebble. A useless extra. There is no way you scored higher than me. Are you going to Yue to be a hero, or to be a loudmouth? The tired, monotone voice cut through the tension like a knife. The entire class turned toward the hallway. Lying on the floor, perfectly still in a bright yellow sleeping bag, was a man with shaggy, unkempt black hair and bloodshot eyes. The man unzipped the sleeping bag and stood up, pulling a juice pouch from his pocket and taking a sip. He looked like he hadn't slept in a week. It took you lot exactly 8 seconds to quiet down, the man sighed, stepping up to the teacher's podium. Time is a precious resource. You kids aren't rational enough. Izuku analyzed the man instantly. The capture scarf around his neck, the tired eyes. Shota Aizawa. The erasure hero, Eraserhead. He's an underground hero. I'm your homeroom teacher, Shota Aizawa. The man introduced himself, devoid of any enthusiasm. Nice to meet you. The class stared in stunned silence. This hobo was their teacher. Aizawa reached into his sleeping bag and pulled out a stack of blue and white tracksuits. It's sudden, But put these on and meet me out on the P grounds. Aizawa locked eyes with Izuku for a brief second. The teacher's dark eyes narrowed slightly, lingering on the golden belt encircling Izuku's waist. Midoriya, Aizawa said flatly. Your uniform was specially ordered. It's in locker 18. Don't tear it. Why, yes, sir. Izuku rumbled, bowing respectfully. The P grounds. The dirt field of the UA Physical Education grounds was bathed in the warm morning sun. Class 1A stood in a loose cluster, all wearing the blue and white UA tracksuits. Izuku felt slightly ridiculous. His tracksuit pants were tight around his massive thighs, and the jacket was completely unzipped, unable to close over his broad chest and the ever-present power save belt. He looked less like a student and more like a professional heavyweight fighter arriving for a title bout. A quirk apprehension test? The class collectively yelled in shock. But what about the entrance ceremony? Or orientation? Asked Uraraka, who was standing near Izuku, completely unbothered by his imposing size. If you're going to become a hero, you don't have time for such leisurely events, Aizawa replied, standing with his back to the class. UA's selling point is its unrestricted traditions. That applies to how the teachers run their classes, too. Aizawa turned around, a sadistic glint in his tired eyes. You've been doing these tests since junior high. Pitches, 50-meter dashes, grip strength. But you always did them without quirks. The country still uses averages taken from results devoid of quirks. It's irrational. The Ministry of Education is procrastinating. Aizawa pointed to Bakugo. Bakugo. You finished first in the practical exam. In junior high, what was your best result for the softball throw? 67 meters, Bakugo grunted. Try doing it with your quirk, Aizawa instructed, tossing a softball to the blond boy. Step into the circle. You can do whatever you want as long as you don't leave the circle. Give it all you've got. Bakugo caught the ball, a feral grin spreading across his face. He stepped into the chalk circle, stretching his arms. I'll show them, Bakugo thought, glaring sideways at Izuku. I'll show that purple freak who the real top dog is. Bakugo wound up, channeling the nitroglycerin-like sweat into his palms. He lunged forward, throwing his arm in a brutal arc. Daithai! A massive explosion erupted from Bakugo's hand the exact moment he released the ball. The shockwave rattled the teeth of the students watching. The ball was launched into the stratosphere like a rocket, leaving a trail of smoke in its wake. Aizawa held up a small device. It beeped. He turned the screen around for the class to see. 705.2 meters. The class erupted into cheers. 700 meters? That's insane. This looks like so much fun. We can use our quirks as much as we want. As expected from the hero course. Aizawa's expression darkened. The temperature on the field seemed to drop by 10 degrees. It looks like fun, huh? Aizawa muttered, his capture scarf beginning to levitate ominously around his neck. You have 3 years to become a hero. Are you going to have an attitude like that the whole time? Aizawa smiled, a terrifying, predatory expression. All right. Whoever comes in last place in all 8 tests will be judged to have no potential, and will be punished with expulsion. The class froze. Expulsion? Uraraka gasped. But it's the first day. That's completely unfair. Natural disasters, massive accidents, villain attacks. Calamities that cannot be predicted, Aizawa countered sharply. Japan is covered in unfairness. Heroes are the ones who reverse those situations. If you wanted to go talk with your friends at McDonald's after school, you're at the wrong place. For the next 3 years, you will inflict hardship after hardship upon you. Go plus ultra. Overcome it with all you've got. Izuku clenched his massive fists. He wasn't afraid. He had moved literal mountains of trash to be here. He had broken his own body down to a cellular level to evolve. A physical test was exactly his domain. Let's begin, Aizawa said. Test 1, 50-meter dash. Izuku stepped up to the starting line. Beside him was a boy with slicked-back blonde hair and a laser emitter on his stomach, Yuga Aoyama. Prepare to eat my dust, Monsieur, Aoyama winked, striking a pose. Izuku didn't respond. He dropped into a sprinter's stance. His heavy boots dug deep into the dirt track. He visualized the kinetic chain, focused the mass. Drive through the thighs. The robotic camera at the finish line beeped. On your marks. Get set. Go! Boom! The dirt beneath Izuku's feet exploded backward as he launched himself forward. Aoyama fired his naval laser, propelling himself backward through the air, but he was forced to stop, clutching his stomach after a second. Izuku was a blur of purple muscle. His sheer mass meant his acceleration wasn't instantaneous, but once he built momentum, he was an unstoppable freight train. His heavy boots pounded the track, each step sounding like a pile driver. He crossed the finish line, creating a localized gust of wind that blew Aoyama's hair out of place. 5.24 seconds, the robotic voice announced. Izuku nodded, satisfied. It wasn't as fast as Ida's 3.04 seconds, but for a body weighing 300 pounds, it was terrifyingly quick. Test 2, grip strength. The class gathered around a set of digital dynamometers. Izuku picked one up. It looked comically small in his massive, slate-gray hand. He remembered the shattered toothbrush this morning. He needed to be careful not to break school property on the first day. He squeezed gently. Just enough to register a score. Crunch. Izuku winced. He looked down. The metal handle of the dynamometer was bent entirely inward, the digital screen cracked and sparking. He looked over at Aizawa, offering an apologetic grimace. Aizawa sighed, walking over and taking the broken machine from Izuku's hand. The screen was flickering wildly. It displayed a flashing error, followed by max limit exceeded, 1,000 kilograms. Aizawa looked at the broken machine, then up at Izuku's thick forearms, then down at the golden belt. Midoriya, Aizawa said quietly, so the rest of the class couldn't hear. Your registry says fighting-type mutation? But this belt, it's a limiter, isn't it? Bioorganic? Yes, sensei, Izuku replied respectfully. My evolution during the exam caused a massive spike in kinetic output. My biology generated the belt to prevent my muscles from tearing themselves apart from their own force. It acts as a governor. So your current state is your limited strength, Aizawa observed, his eyes narrowing in analytical interest. Fascinating. Try not to break anything else. Words spread quickly among the class. Did you see? The big guy broke the machine. Over 1,000 kilos? Is he a gorilla quirk? He looks like a villain. Test 3-4. Standing long jump and repeated side steps. Izuku cleared the sandbox easily in the long jump, his heavy legs acting as massive springs, propelling his dense frame in a perfect, parabolic arc. The repeated side steps were slightly more difficult. His sheer width and mass made lateral agility awkward, but he powered through it using raw muscle control, scoring well above average. By the fifth test, Izuku was securely in the top tier of the class. He hadn't placed first in every event, but his baseline physical stats were so outrageously high that he was dominating the aggregate score. Bakugo was seething. Every time Izuku scored well, the blonde boy looked like he was going to blow a blood vessel. Test 5, the softball throw. This was the deciding event. The test where Uraraka had scored infinity using her zero gravity, and where Bakugo had asserted his dominance with a 705-meter blast. Midoriya, Aizawa called out, pointing to the chalk circle. Your turn. Izuku stepped into the circle. He picked up a softball from the bucket. It felt like a golf ball in his massive hand. He looked out over the field. He could throw this ball incredibly far with his current strength. With proper technique and his massive leverage, he could easily clear 300 or 400 meters. But Izuku remembered the entrance exam. He remembered All Might's words. Yui will inflict hardship after hardship upon you. Overcome it with all you've got. He wasn't here to be average. He wasn't here to hide his power. He needed to show Aizawa, the class, and Bakugo that he belonged at the absolute top. Izuku turned his head, looking back at Aizawa. Sensei, Izuku said, his deep voice carrying across the silent field. I request permission to remove my limiter. The class gasped collectively. Remove his limiter? A boy with spiky red hair, Eijiro Kurishima, muttered. You mean that giant gold belt thing? That's restricting his power? Aizawa's eyes flashed with a dangerous curiosity. He knew the risks of biological limiters. Removing them often resulted in immense self-damage. But this was a test of potential. He needed to see the ceiling of Midoriya's power. Aizawa's capture scarf unspooled slightly, and his eyes glowed red, activating his erasure quirk, ready to cancel Izuku's mutation if things went out of control. You have 5 seconds, Aizawa permitted. If I deem it too dangerous, I will erase your quirk, and you will forfeit the throw. Proceed. Izuku nodded. He turned his attention back to the field. He took a deep breath, filling his massive lungs. He reached down with both hands and grabbed the large, organic buckle of the power save belt. He pressed his thick thumbs into the release nodes. Click. The moment the buckle unlatched, the atmosphere in the P grounds completely changed. It wasn't an explosion of fire or light. It was a change in pressure. A heavy, suffocating wave of pure kinetic intent washed over the class. Several students instinctively took a step back, the air suddenly feeling thick and hard to breathe. Izuku let out a low, guttural groan. Without the belt regulating his energy, the hyperdense muscles in his body began to rapidly engorge. The purple-gray skin on his arms and chest tightened terrifyingly. Thick, pulsing veins, glowing with a faint, dangerous white light, snaked up his neck and across his massive biceps. His 3 cranial crests flared outward. He was overflowing with raw, unadulterated power. It hurt. It felt like his skin was going to tear open from the inside out. I only have a few seconds before my muscles tear, Izuku analyzed through the pain. I can't just throw it like a baseball. The centrifugal force would dislocate my shoulder. I need a martial strike. I need to push the ball, not throw it. Izuku brought his left arm up, aiming down the field. He pulled his right arm back, clutching the softball tightly, holding it near his right pectoral. He didn't wind up. He dropped his center of gravity into a flawless, unmovable horse stance. He visualized the energy pooling in his core, channeling the overflowing kinetic force up through his spine, into his shoulder, and down his arm. He pictured the mechanics of an unblockable, perfect strike. Vital. Throw. Izuku didn't throw the ball. He punched the air holding the ball. His right arm snapped forward in a piston-like thrust. The sheer speed and mass of his arm moving through the air created a localized sonic boom. The air cracked like a cannon shot. The softball left his hand. It didn't arc. It didn't curve. It drew a perfectly straight, white line across the sky, leaving a rippling contrail of displaced air in its wake, shattering the sound barrier instantly. The shockwave generated from Izuku's punch kicked up a massive cloud of dust around the pitching circle, blowing Aizawa's hair back. The moment the ball left his hand, Izuku immediately grabbed the 2 ends of the golden belt and slammed them back together. Click! The heavy pressure in the air vanished instantly. Izuku fell to his knees in the dirt, gasping for air, his right arm smoking profusely from the friction. The glowing veins under his skin rapidly faded as the belt clamped back down on his biology, siphoning the dangerous excess energy. Silence reigned over the field. Absolute, stunned silence. Beep. Aizawa looked down at the device in his hand. His tired eyes widened a fraction of a millimeter. He turned the screen around without a word. 805.3 meters. 800. Kirishima whispered, his jaw hitting the floor. He beat Bakugo's score. Kaminari, a boy with lightning bolt hair, muttered in terror. Without an emitter quirk. He just threw it with pure muscle. Izuku slowly stood up, rubbing his right shoulder. It ached terribly, a stark reminder of why the belt was necessary, but the muscles hadn't torn. He looked at the score and smiled. He's a monster, Mineta, a short boy with purple balls on his head, whimpered, hiding behind Ida's leg. But not everyone was in awe. Deku! A roar of pure, unhinged rage tore through the quiet field. Izuku turned around just in time to see Katsuki Bakugo charging at him. The blond boy's face was contorted into a demonic mask of fury, his palms crackling with massive, uncontrolled explosions. Tell me how you did it! Bakugo screamed, launching himself into the air, aiming a point-blank explosion right at Izuku's face. Tell me what kind of trick you used, you damn heavy freak. Izuku didn't flinch. He didn't raise his arms to block. He didn't even shift his stance. He simply looked at Bakugo. Before Bakugo could unleash the blast, gray cloth wrapped entirely around his torso, binding his arms to his sides. The explosions in his palms fizzled out into pathetic wisps of smoke. Bakugo fell to the dirt, thrashing wildly against the capture scarf. What the? Let me go! My quirk! They're weapons for capture, Aizawa said coldly, holding the other end of the scarf. His hair was standing on end, his eyes glowing a fierce red behind his goggles as he stared Bakugo down, woven with carbon fibers and a special metal alloy. Stop making me use my quirk so much. I have dry eye. Aizawa blinked, deactivating his quirk, and unraveled the scarf. Bakugo stumbled forward, breathing heavily, his eyes locked on Izuku. Aizawa stepped between them. We're wasting time. Whoever is next, step up. Bakugo didn't move. He stood there, his fists clenched so tightly his knuckles were white, trembling with a mixture of rage and profound denial. He looked at Izuku. He expected to see the Deku of middle school. He expected to see the boy trembling, looking away, apologizing profusely, but he didn't. Izuku Midoriya stood tall. At 6'2", his broad, purple-gray shoulders blocked out the sun behind him. His three crests stood rigid, an evolutionary crown of combat. His white, glowing eyes looked down at Bakugo not with fear, and not with arrogance. He looked down at Bakugo with calm, unshakable pity. Izuku didn't say a word. He didn't need to. The message was clear in his posture, in his silence, and in the crater he had left in the chalk circle. I am not looking up at you anymore, Kaken. Izuku turned his massive back on the blonde boy and walked over to rejoin the rest of the class. As he approached, the students subconsciously parted, giving him a wide berth of respect. Dude, Kirishima said, walking up to Izuku with a massive grin, offering a fist bump. That was incredibly manly. Your quirk is insane. I'm Eijiro Kirishima. Izuku looked at the offered fist. A genuine, warm smile broke across his intimidating face. He gently tapped his massive, slate-gray knuckle against Kirishima's. I'm Izuku Midoriya, he rumbled politely. It's nice to meet you. Uraraka popped up next to him, beaming. You really are amazing, Midoriya. That throw went past the clouds. Thank you, Uraraka-san, Izuku stammered, his deep voice cracking slightly as a dark purple blush covered his cheeks. He might have the body of a mythological titan, but inside, he was still the same nervous fanba who couldn't handle talking to girls. The results. The final tests passed quickly. Aizawa pulled up the holographic scoreboard for the entire class to see. Izuku scanned the list from the top down. 1. Momo Yaoyorozu. 2. Shoto Todoroki. 3. Izuku Midoriya. 4. Katsuki Bakugo. 5. Tenya Ida. Izuku let out a deep breath he didn't know he was holding. Third place. He had placed above Bakugo. By the way, I was lying about the expulsion, Aizawa announced casually, zipping his sleeping bag up to his chin. It was a rational deception to draw out the upper limits of your quirks. The class erupted into a mixture of relief and outrage. Izuku just chuckled, a deep rumbling sound. He liked Aizawa's teaching style. It was brutal, it was demanding, and it forced growth. It reminded him of the beach. As the class began to filter back inside to change, Aizawa watched the large, purple-gray boy walk away, chatting nervously with Uraraka and Ida. Izuku Midoriya, Aizawa thought, pulling a juice pouch from his pocket. A fighting-type mutation that evolved under duress, generating a biological limiter to contain an exponential increase in kinetic output. He has the raw power of All Might, but housed in a body explicitly designed to wield it without self-destruction. Aizawa took a sip of his juice, a rare, microscopic smile touching his lips. He's going to be a problem for the villains. The walk to the train station after school was quiet. Izuku walked alongside Uraraka and Ida, the setting sun casting long shadows across the pavement. I am still astounded by your performance, Midoriya. Ida chopped his hands in the air. To possess such overwhelming physical might, yet have the restraint to use a limiter, it shows great maturity. Thanks, Ida, Izuku smiled, adjusting the strap of his backpack over his massive shoulder. I'm just glad I didn't break my arm on that throw. The belt really does most of the heavy lifting when it comes to keeping me in one piece. Hey, Midoriya! Izuku stopped. He recognized the voice. Walking down the steps toward them was Katsuki Bakugo. His hands were shoved in his pockets, his posture aggressive, his face shadowed by the evening light. Uraraka and Ida tensed, sensing the hostility. Izuku gently put a hand out, signaling for them to stay back. He stepped forward to meet his childhood tormentor. Bakugo stopped a few feet away. He had to tilt his head up to maintain eye contact. "You didn't beat me," Bakugo growled, his voice dangerously low. "You got a lucky shot with that throw, and you scored high on some stupid fitness tests. But this isn't the end, Deku." Bakugo pointed a finger directly at Izuku's golden belt. "You think you're hot shit because you got big? Because you have some shiny belt holding you together?" Bakugo sneered, small explosions popping on his fingertips. "A real fight isn't a long jump. When we face off in combat training, I'm going to blow that belt right off your waist. I'm going to prove to everyone that you're still just a useless pebble. I will be the #1 hero, and I'll step over your giant, purple corpse to do it." For a long moment, the only sound was the distant rumble of the commuter train. Izuku looked at Bakugo. He saw the desperation in the blonde boy's eyes. Bakugo's entire worldview was built on absolute superiority. Izuku's existence, his sudden power, shattered that worldview. Izuku didn't get angry. He didn't activate his guts. He simply crossed his massive arms over his chest. "I'm not trying to step over you, Kaken," Izuku said, his deep voice calm and unwavering. "I'm just trying to move forward. But if you want to fight me..." Izuku's white, glowing eyes narrowed slightly, a flash of warrior's instinct breaking through his gentle demeanor. "You're going to have to punch a lot harder than you used to." Bakugo's breath hitched. He scowled, turning on his heel and marching aggressively toward the station. "Watch your back, you damn nerd." Izuku watched him go. The tension slowly bled out of his dense muscles. "Are you alright, Midoriya?" Ida asked, stepping up beside him. "His hostility toward you is highly inappropriate for a hero course student." "I'm fine, Ida," Izuku smiled, turning back to his new friends. "Kaken is just... Kaken. He communicates through conflict." Uraraka tilted her head. "Kaken? But he called you Deku. Isn't that an insult? Like someone who can't do anything?" Izuku looked down at his slate-gray hands. For 10 years, that name had been a brand of failure. A reminder that he was a quirkless, useless anomaly. But he wasn't that person anymore. He was the boy who cleared Takoba Beach. He was the boy who shattered the zero-pointer. He was the hero of 1,000 punches. "It used to be an insult," Izuku smiled, looking at Uraraka. "But I think I'm going to change the meaning. From now on, Deku means the one who can do it." Uraraka's eyes lit up. "I like that. Deku. It sounds like a hero's name." Izuku's massive chest swelled with pride. He laughed, a deep, booming sound that echoed down the street. The first day was over. The physical limits had been tested, the rivalries established, and the foundation of his future laid. The Yui curriculum promised hardship, villains, and grueling trials. But as Izuku Midoriya walked toward the train, his golden belt gleaming in the twilight, he knew he was ready to face whatever came next, head on.